cold knife down 7th Avenue, and turned breath into fog on the hospital doors. Sodium lights hummed, salt crusted the curb like old lace. Somewhere, a gull laughed at a trash bag, and the sound rang cheap. Inside the Children's Medical Center, Vents pushed citrus antiseptic into the lobby, a clean that stung the back of the nose. Out here, the wind made the revolving doors stutter, a hiccup every third turn. It sounded like a hinge clearing its throat. A boy sat on a flattened shipping box near the entrance, knees up, elbows on denim. 9 years old by the look of him, smaller by the way. The jacket swallowed his shoulders. Retknit bianie. One boot patched with duct tape, silver scar winking under the fluorescence. He drew on a black marble composition book, pencil wandering from triangles to ankles to little arrows that meant something to him and no one else. He didn't hold a sign. He didn't ask for change. He looked at the door like it was a tide that could be read. People rushed, shoes squeaking, coffee lids hissing, elevators pinging their metallic hello, nurses in navy scrubs, a mother wearing yesterday's shirt, a teenager with a bandage like a halo. Nobody saw the boy until they did, and then they looked away as if he'd asked them for a piece they didn't have. A dark gray SUV slid against the curb and idled, the muffler, coughing plumes that ribboned and vanished. The driver cut the engine and sat a beat too long. His tie was loosened one knuckle, graying at the temples, a face trained to project competence that had misplaced its source code. The passenger mirror held a child's seat, pink blanket tucked to chin height. The girl blinked at the ceiling of the car and counted nothing. He opened the back door and gathered her, the way you're taught to carry breakables, one arm under knees that had gone on strike, one hand behind shoulders that still knew how to listen. She was light for her age, 6 going on quiet, curls combed to one side like they were also trying to behave. He said her name without volume, as if noise could crack the morning. Nora. She didn't answer. Her eyes shifted past his collar and fixed on the high November sky, thin as tin. He shifted her weight and started for the revolving door. The wind lifted the blanket edge and slapped it against his sleeve. The boy on the box watched the lift, the slap, the way the man adjusted to keep everything from sliding. "Sir," the boy said. The man didn't hear it at first, or pretended not to. He took another step, and the door sighed in 3 sections. "Sir," the boy repeated, the sound soft and shaped, not a sales pitch. "I can help your daughter." The man stopped mid-stride and turned only his head. The hospital glass breathed on his shoulder and fogged the lapel. "What did you say?" "I can help," the boy said. He slid the pencil into the spiral of the composition book and stood. The duct-taped boot made a small, careful sound on the concrete. "If you want," the man looked the boy over the way. A lawyer scans a contract for the clause that bites. Jacket too big, beanie pulled low, hands steady, eyes that had learned not to flinch first. "That isn't funny. I'm not trying to be," the boy said. Traffic murmured behind them, a city-sized exhale. A volunteer shepherded a cluster of toddlers past the spray-painted footprints that taught them where to walk. Somewhere, a metal cartwheel caught a tile seam and complained. The man drew his daughter closer. She watched the boy now, which was new. "We're going inside," the man said. "You should," the boy said, and nodded at the door like it was a doctor he respected. "The heat in there is good for muscles." He swallowed once, a dry click. "I'll be here when you come out." The man opened his mouth like he had a speech and found nothing on the teleprompter. "Do you have... Where are your parents?" The boy's jaw worked once, like he was trying out a piece of gum he couldn't afford. "Around," he said. He tapped his notebook with a forefinger. "My mom used to help people move. I can show you what she showed me." The man weighed the sentence, and the boy, and the cold air in his lungs, and did the thing adults do when their body believes a stranger faster than their brain does. He stepped into the revolving door and let it push him into the scent of lemon and hand soap. The last slice of glass cut the boy from his view. The wind stitched the street back together. The boy sat down on the box and opened the notebook to a page with a knee drawn large as a moon. Inside, the elevator chimed 4s and 8s. The man said his name at the desk and wore his politeness like an overcoat that still had the store tag attached. He carried Nora through corridors that believed in their own brightness and offered her to clinicians who knew how to hold both chart and child. Words floated and thudded: spasticity, regimen, managing expectations. He nodded, like nodding could change the meaning of nouns. Nora stared at a ceiling tile with a hairline crack and traced it with her eyes until the crack became a river, and the river carried her somewhere warmer. Oars became smaller units, fetals taken, limbs touched with professional fingers. A wall clock's second hand clicked a march. No one could stop. The man Martin signed something he'd signed before, printed, "Hail," as if the letters were trying to stay. When they came out, the sun had pushed through enough cloud to pretend it had been faithful. The wind was still rude. Martin shifted Nora with that new economy of motion he'd learned from repetition, the kind that doesn't feel special until you count the effort. He turned toward the curb, ready to fold the day into the car and call it survived. The boy was still there. Same box. Same bianye. The duct tape on the boot had scuffed darker. The composition book was shut now, palm resting on the cover like a promise he didn't want to blow away. "You again," Martin said. He heard the edge in his voice and let it be. "Why would you say something like that?" He nodded at the building behind him, the armored glass, the talent inside. "You think this is a joke?" "No," the boy said, and added the part that mattered: "You look tired." Nora shifted against Martin's shoulder and looked from boy to father, the way a cat watches two birds decide who gets the wire. The boy stepped forward 1/2 step and stopped, like he'd found his line, and chalked it himself. "What's your name?" Martin asked. "Eli," the boy said. He didn't offer a last name, like he'd learned some names were safe to keep. He pointed at the notebook. "I draw so I don't forget angles," he said. "Angles," like the word had weight. "You're 9, Martin said. "Almost 10. Eli corrected. He felt dumb when he heard himself, then didn't. "And you can help her." Martin said it flat. "I can try in a way that doesn't make her scared," Eli said. He lifted both hands, palms out, nothing in them but coal. 1 hour. Not inside. It's too loud and smells like worry. Harrington Park. Noon tomorrow. If you hate it, you leave. You say, "Stop." I stop. She says, "Stop." I stop. He looked at Nora. "You say it." Nora's mouth found the smallest corner of a smile and then hid it. "Stop," she said, barely above a whisper. The consonant sat clean on her tongue. "Good," Eli said, and it sounded like approval and not power. "So you know you can." Martin felt the breath he'd been holding escape in a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "This is insane," he said to the air, and the air didn't disagree. He shifted the weight in his arm. He considered the kind of risk that wears a coat and calls itself hope. He hated that his chest warmed at the thought. "Harrington Park," Eli repeated, as if reciting an address could manifest a better map. "By the oak." Noon. Martin stared at the boy the way you stare at a mirror in bad lighting and make a face just to prove you're not the face you see. He looked at Nora. She lifted 2 fingers and walked them across the blanket like legs. He closed his eyes long enough to register the sting behind them and opened them before anything leaked. "Fine," he said. 1 hour. Eli nodded once. "Not gratitude. Terms accepted." He sat back down, returned his palm to the notebook, and watched the door spin out more stories. On the drive home, the car's heat lied about how much better the day had gotten. The vents smelled faintly of lemon from the building, and a ghost of French fries bought for a different child on a better day. Nora turned her face to the window and drew little circles in the fog with a fingernail. "Do you think he meant it?" she asked. "Which part?" Martin said. "The stop part," she said. "Yes," he said. He didn't know yet why he knew. They passed Harrington on the right, the oak bare-armed and unapologetic. Branches scribbled like wire against a sky that had forgotten summer. A swing set hunched in the corner of the field, chains trimmed short to survive storms. Wind slid through and made a single syllable out of metal, a soft, stubborn chick. At home, the quiet met them at the door like a dog that missed them but knew better than to jump. The thermostat clicked. The kitchen smelled like coffee that hadn't been made. Martin set Nora in her chair, with the care of a man who'd learned both the right height and the right joke. "Do we like leftovers?" he asked in a game show voice that did not belong to his mouth. "We survive them," she said, and that landed more honest than he wanted. He went to his office and looked at piles like someone else had stacked them there. He opened a browser tab and typed Eli Birmingham and got a dentist, an HVAC tech, a 16-year-old soccer player. He tried Boy Red Beanie Hospital and closed the tab before the engine could make suggestions. He pulled a legal pad and wrote a single sentence he didn't believe and needed anyway. 1 hour can't hurt if stop means stop. He underlined stop because he wanted to see it more than read it. Night asked the windows to trade outside for inside. He said yes and turned on a lamp. Nora wheeled into the doorway and watched him with the grave attention of 6. "Is he staying with us?" she asked. "No," Martin said, then heard the word and scrubbed it. "Not unless he needs a ride." She nodded once as if that settled the planet. "He looked like he knew where to put his hands," she said, and because she said it, he remembered the boy's palms held up to the air, empty of everything but intention. He nodded like a man humoring a rumor he wants to be true. Later, dishes rinsed, the blanket tucked, the house performing domestic competence. Martin stood at the sink, with his fingertips against the cool of the window. On the glass, his breath made a small circle that refused to last. Outside, 2 streets over, the park sat under a sky that could pass for mercy if you squinted. The swing set waited for weather. Wind came low and worked at the chains until one answered with a small, patient syllable he could almost hear. "Chick." Harrington Park woke like a slow eye. Frost pinned the grass in silver. The cracked court carried a chalk smell that didn't belong to winter. The oak stood, stripped and sure, its branches braided against a sky the color of a peeled stone. A city truck coughed once and left. Somewhere, a lid clanged. The swing chains tried their note, tested the cold, found the register. "Chick." Eli arrived on foot, grocery sack hugged to his ribs. He set it on the bench and pulled out his little universe, a towel, folded into a precise rectangle, a jar of rice wrapped in a dishcloth that breathed heat, a tennis ball rubbed bald, a pair of clean socks, a small plastic bottle of cocoa butter that clicked open with a quarter turn. He placed each thing with the care of someone laying out instruments he could fix if they broke. He drew a laminated sheet from the sack and smoothed it with his palm. Community movement. Consent first, not clinical care. The green header announced. A QR code waited like a door with good hinges. He propped the sheet in a cheap acrylic stand and leaned a second sign against the bench. Ask before filming. In block letters a block away could read, Mr. Barlow came down the path in a parka, the color of caution tape, carrying a folding card table in one hand and 2 camp chairs in the other. Francine says, "Blue ink only," he said by way of hello, setting the table and tapping its legs until they gave up wobble. He fished a pickle jar of pens from his coat pocket and lined them like fence posts. Black runs when it argues with rain. Eli smiled with one side of his mouth and returned to the towel. He set the warm rice on it and watched a small cloud disappear. He capped and uncapped the cocoa butter once to be sure the thread wouldn't strip. The SUV eased to a stop behind the backboard, tires cracking frozen leaves. Martin got out, every movement deliberate, and lifted Nora to the chair he'd pulled from the trunk. She wore a sweatshirt with a comet stitched on the front, its tail doing more work than the star. Her hair had the sleep still in it. "Morning," Barlow said. He nodded toward the pens like a man proud of his small machine. "Waivers 1 page. Big fun. Blue ink." Martin took a clipboard. The paper felt colder than it should. Name. Date. Emergency contact. The sentence that mattered. Voluntary. Non-medical. Consent before touch. Stop means stop. Then a line for signatures. He signed and printed without flourishes. Eli crouched at the towel's edge and kept his hands visible until the air agreed they were allowed. "Before anything," he said, looking at Nora, not her father, "if you say stop, I stop. If you want to rest, we rest. You can fire me by blinking. If you want." She considered the offer with the gravity of a judge who had kept her docket orderly. "Okay," she said. "Can I touch your legs?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, and the word came out shaped like yes. A little later, he placed the rice packs across her thighs and watched her face, not the cloth. "Too hot." "It's good," she said, and a little steam lifted from the dishcloth like a small, invisible blessing. He opened the cocoa butter and let it soften on his palm. The smell was sweet and faintly old-fashioned. He set the bottle aside, rubbed the film into his hand, and waited as if patience were a tool that needed warming too. The socks went on next, both hands under the heel, each movement slow enough to read. A jogger cut across the court and slowed. Phone already raised. He thumbed the camera as if it were a reflex he couldn't unlearn. The lens pointed at Nora's face and found its confidence. "Sir," Barlow said, stepping into the line of sight without touching the man or his attention. He lifted the "ask before filming" sign until it filled the frame and held "read before you record." His voice never climbed. The jogger shrugged one shoulder, lowered his phone to mid-chest, and wandered toward the path with the put-upon gait of a man whose import had been misread. A woman in a quilted jacket approached, eyes soft around the edges and uncertain in the middle. A badge hung from a lanyard, but she tucked it into her pocket without drama. "I'm a nurse," she said quietly. "Off shift. Can I sit and watch?" "Pull a chair," Barlow said, already unfolding one. "You're our second pair of eyes." A second car door thunk. Avery crossed the grass at a diagonal. "Camera bag," knocking her hip. She gave a quick little wave you could miss if you weren't waiting for it and set up wide. The oak, the towel, the signs, the jar of pens in one long shot. "Names for consent," she asked, not yet lifting the camera. She recorded the yes, date, time, faces in frame, but not fragged, and then lowered the lens as if it weighed a promise. "Okay," Eli said to Nora. He tapped the side of her knee, very light, like a knuckle on a door. "Tell me if you feel the knock." "No," she said. "Okay," he said again, and he meant it as acknowledgement, not disappointment. He slid the tennis ball beneath her right heel and placed her foot on it. "Press the book," he said, "like you're stamping your name. Not a lot, just enough to show off." "What book?" she asked. "The most boring one you can think of," he said. "Something heavy with no pictures." Tax code, Martin said under his breath, and Avery's mouth twitched once before finding neutral. Nora pressed. The sock whispered. Nothing more. Nothing less. Eli watched her face for the flicker between effort and fear, and saw only effort. Good, he said. Again, like you're making a mark and then leaving it. She pressed again. The ball shifted a hair, the motion swallowed by wool, but some other small thing in the air announced itself. Martin's shoulders letting down from his ears, the nurse's hands finding stillness on her own knees, Barlow's pen tapping once on plastic and then stopping. What if I can't? Nora asked, and buried the question in the collar of her sweatshirt too late. Then you can't today, he said. And tomorrow we ask in a different way. He lifted the belt to show it without naming it, and set it beside her like a friend who could wait outside. You call this in when you want it, not before. Footsteps at the edge of the court. A mother with a boy the size of a fourth grader, and a walker hesitated near the sign. The boy's t-shirt read, "Dinosaurs didn't read," in cracked letters. His grin said, he liked the argument. The mother hovered, looking for a place to put both caution and relief. Waivers there, Barlow said, pointing with his chin. Blue pens. He addressed the boy directly. If you don't want anything today, the grass is still free. The boy snorted and rolled closer on the walker's tennis balls. His mother signed her name like she was signing a treaty. The nurse slid her chair an inch to make room without making a fuss of it. Okay, Eli said to Nora again. I'm going to rock your knee a tiny bit. Not a stretch, just a hello. Okay, she said, and watched his hands instead of the knee. He moved with the rhythm of someone counting to 4 for someone else. Breaths timed to a metronome, the size of a chest. Feel that? Not really. Good, he said. That means we're not surprising anything yet. The sun pushed through the cold with a stubborn beam and warmed the towel's corner. Eli shifted the rice to catch it like a poor man's magnifying glass. He tapped her ankle, then again. Now, a little, she said, and frowned as if suspicion could call sensation a liar. That's enough, he said. He shook out his hands, and the cocoa butter left a thin gloss, evidence that work had been done without fanfare. A figure in a heavy coat drifted close with his phone up. He didn't check the sign. He framed tight. Hungry. Avery stepped quick behind him and panned wider until the rule board and the waiver table sat in the corner of his shot like witnesses. Context matters, she said lightly. He embarrassed at the ears and found a trash can to look into. Rest, Eli said to Nora. He took the socks off with the same care he'd used to put them on and folded them into the towel. Neat, ready to leave no friction behind. He adjusted the blanket on her knees, like he had a right to exactly none of her warmth. You did work. That counts. That was nothing, she said, but her mouth said, maybe. While the word left, nothing is where everything starts, he said. The body likes reminders more than orders. Martin crouched and looked at the ball like it had done a trick, and refused to explain it. How long next time? Same hour, Eli said. Shorter pushes. Fewer. Stop on good. The boy with the walker had been watching half bored, half interested. Do I get the boring book too? He asked. If you want the stamp, Eli said. I want the stamp, the boy said, and his mother laughed a little, then put a hand over her mouth, as if laughter were a precious gas that could escape. Clouds thinned, the court brightened by degrees. The nurse took out a pocket notebook and wrote, "Stop" means stop on the top line and underlined it twice. Not because she forgot, but because writing sometimes makes room where memory won't. Barlow gathered the clipboards, checked for signatures like a man counting hymnals, and slid them into a sleeve. Date stamped, he said, stamping the corner with a blue rectangle. You'd be surprised how many arguments a date cures. Cookies Wednesday, he added, almost as an afterthought. Policy, the nurse asked. Policy, Barlow said, and didn't smile. They wound the hour down into smaller motions. Eli offered the belt, didn't insist, and took it back when Nora shook her head once. The tennis ball returned to the sack, the rice cooled, and became just rice again. Avery panned once across the scene sign. Towel. Bin. Yar. Mother and Walker boy then clicked the camera off without ceremony. Tomorrow, Nora said, and made it sound like testing a bridge. Tomorrow, Eli said. He touched the laminated corner, pressing it flat. A gust tried to lift it and failed. They moved toward the car, Martin carrying Nora the way he now knew, and left the court to gather itself. Barlow folded the table. The nurse tucked the notebook in her pocket and looked like she might sleep. The Walker boy rolled his eyes at an invisible dinosaur and followed his mother to the path. Wind came through the swing set and found the pitch it had practiced all morning. The chains gave their one spare word to the day. Clean, ordinary, true, chick. Sunday was the color of dishwater, and colder than it looked. The park held its own breath. Frost made lace along the chain link. The oak wore a halo of steam, where a thin sun touched. The swings tried their note and didn't like it yet. Chick. Eli set the towel and didn't hurry. The rice jar was hotter than last time. He rolled it in the dishcloth and shook the heat down to the corners. Socks, belt, tennis ball, cocoa butter. He pressed the laminated sheet flat with his palm and watched the edge settle, as if paper understood persuasion. The SUV door thunk. Martin lifted Nora out slower than hope wants. Her eyes were rimmed pink, the kind that comes from a night that argued. The comet on her sweatshirt looked tired of traveling. She didn't say hello. She looked at the towel, and then at the sky, like the towel had betrayed her by being smaller than the sky. Morning, Eli said, tone level. He squat to her height and kept his hands visible, palms warm from the jar. Same, rules. I don't want rules this time, she said. Okay, he said. Do you want to sit? She sat. Not a surrender, a logistics. He laid the rice across her thighs and waited for her face to say it was tolerable. Her mouth made a line that tried to be brave and fell back into honest. Too hot? He asked. No. She stared at the tree and blinked too slow. It's nothing either way. He loosened the cap on the cocoa butter and let the scent lift, sweet and steady. Today can be shorter, he said, or we can just breathe. I don't want to breathe either, she said, and the sentence came out like a cough. Okay, he said again, because okay is a place to stand. Barlow arrived mid-silence with the card table under one arm and a box of clipboards under the other. Francine upgraded the pen, he announced, setting them in a neat row. Waterproof. The apocalypse will find us ready. He clocked Nora's face and didn't add anything else. He set a chair for a mother arriving with a boy and withdrew a half step so the air could make its own decisions. A jogger slowed and checked his phone for the courage to film. The ask before filming sign caught his eye first, and he adjusted his route like he had meant to run wider all along. Eli rubbed the cocoa butter into his hands and waited for the sheen to dull. He slid one sock on and then stopped. Can I touch your leg today? No, Nora said. He nodded and took his hands away like that had been the plan. Talking only. Then he picked up the tennis ball and set it under her chair. Out of sight, but present. Do you want to imagine the dumbest book on earth? I hate books, she said. And then, because she didn't, she amended. Right now. Okay, he said, and he sounded almost amused. We can hate things for a minute. Martin stayed a pace off, hands in his pockets, thumbs folding and unfolding receipts that weren't there. The wind lifted hair from his temple and laid it down again like it couldn't commit. He watched Eli choose not to move and felt something unclench he didn't know was clenched. A woman in a county windbreaker came along the path, coffee in one hand, badge in the other, like she wasn't sure which would be useful. She slowed at the laminated sheet. Read it. And then kept moving until she stood where she wouldn't be in the scene but could hear the lines. Morning, she said to no one in particular. Morning, Barlow answered, like weather. Carla, the woman supplied, touching the badge to her chest and then tucking it away again. Just passing through. Nora shut her eyes. I tried at home, she announced to the tree. I told my feet to do it. They didn't even listen. They didn't even try to listen. That's a strong refusal. Eli said, feet can be stubborn. They unionize. It almost got a smile, and then didn't. She clenched her hands on the chair arms until bone showed pale under skin. What if they never listen? Then we file a grievance, he said. Straight. But today we can beg, or bribe, or wait outside their office with cookies. I don't like cookies, she muttered, which made Barlow snort out loud and then turn it into a cough. Policy remains unthreatened, he said to the card table. Wind pushed a cloud through the sun like it was late. The towel lost its thin warmth. Eli moved the rice packs closer to the seam of her hips and watched the muscle under the fabric think about nothing. He tapped once at the edge of the patellar tendon, knuckle-like, and looked up. Anything. Stop asking, she said, and the words jumped louder than she meant. Her face went hot with the shame that follows accuracy. Sorry. Thanks, he said, taking the sorry and letting it be a gift. We can stop asking. He picked up the belt and showed it to her like a dog. You don't put on a leash unless both of you agree the sidewalk is chaos. One test, or none. She glared at it. The strap lay in his hands quiet as cloth. If I say stop, you stop, he finished. Say it again. Stop, she said, louder, and something shaped like control came back into her mouth. He slid the belt under her knees. Martin took the ends and held them like they were attached to a bird. Slack unless she asks, Eli said without looking at him. Martin nodded and did slack like he'd trained for it all his life and only just learned the word. Count, Eli asked Nora. No, she said, and then after a long second, 3, you're 3, he said. She pulled a breath under the world's weight. 1, she said, and sweat beaded at her hairline even in the cold. 2. Her jaw set. Somewhere an engine turned over and gave up. 3. He steadied the knees, not lifting, not urging, just telling the joint where it was on the map. She tried. The belt stayed slack. Her thighs trembled, and she made a sound she didn't want anyone to hear. She bit her lip and shook her head hard enough to move the comet on her chest. Stop, she said, and the word carried iron. Stopping, Eli said, already sliding the belt away. Hands in the open, Martin released with the slow care of a parent putting down a hot pan. Nora's breath came in sharp quarters, and then in halves. She stared at the ground and tried to find a version of herself that wasn't crying. It's pointless, she said into her sleeve. I'm so tired of trying for nothing. Okay, Eli said. He sat cross-legged on the asphalt. Not too close. He set the belt beside him so it wouldn't loom. We can be tired today. We can hate all of it for exactly 4 minutes. Timer starts now. 4, she sniffed. It's a very official number. He looked up at the oak. Union rules. Carla shifted her weight and didn't adjust her stance. The coffee steamed like a small chimney. She glanced at the laminated sheet again and wrote, Consent first, on the back of a receipt with a pen she found in her pocket, as if writing could hammer the idea into the morning. Avery appeared without declaring it. She left the camera in the bag and took a position that felt like the back row of a church. She looked at Martin and raised her eyebrows. Yes. No. He shook his head, almost imperceptible. She added a nod that meant, later, and let the moment stay unlabeled. The 4 minutes passed like longer. Nora's breathing leveled into its own math. Eli stood and warmed the tennis ball in both hands, like he was about to juggle for a toddler, and understood how dangerous it would be to drop one. He slipped it under her heel. "Hate it as much as you want," he said, voice small. "Press anyway, not to move it, to tell it you're still its boss." "Books," she said, into the collar. "The dumbest," he agreed. Her heel lowered, not far, enough to leave a whisper of motion in the sock. He nodded once, not smiling, and tapped near the ankle. Again. She did. It wasn't a miracle. It was an argument that landed. Martin let the breath out of his chest and didn't disguise the sound. He crouched but kept his hands to himself. "That looked like something," he said, and hated how hungry he sounded. "It's small," Eli said. "It's real." Nora's face softened a fraction, enough to admit she had heard him. "I still hate you," she said to the ball. "Good," he said. "It works better when you insult it." Barlow stamped the corner of a waiver and slid it into the sleeve. "Blue ink behaves," he murmured, "like weather reporting." The mother of the Walker boy finished signing and looked at the sky as if it might sign back. They stopped early. Eli folded the socks with care and set the rice aside to cool. He wiped his palms on the towel's edge and then on his jeans like he didn't trust the towel to carry all of it. "Thank you," he told Nora, and it wasn't a courtesy. "Whatever," she said, and then, smaller, "Thanks." Carla started toward them and then thought better. She took a card from her pocket and handed it to Barlow instead. "If they ever need paperwork to make this less precarious," she said, low. "Caregiver affidavit. School stuff. My cell's on the back." Barlow tucked the card into the pen jar like it belonged there with the blue. "Cookies Wednesday," he announced to the easy air. "Union rule." "Alias policy," Barlow said, and didn't grin. On the way to the car, Martin fell into step with Eli. "Dinner," he said, like he was testing a ladder rung. "If your plan's a low." Eli looked at the sack in his hands, and then at Nora's braid, messy and fierce. "Okay," he said. He sounded like someone who had learned not to assume there would be a next room. They ate by a window that collected dust. Spaghetti. Too much garlic. Forks clinking. Nora picked at a noodle and made it into a worm and then into a jump rope for the salt shaker. The television stayed off. The radiator ticked. The house lived small. After, in the den, Eli warmed the rice again and set the towel on the rug until it knew where it was supposed to live. He asked the question with his eyes. Nora nodded once, and that was enough. He placed the cloth on her calves, and she closed her eyes like she was remembering something she might once have liked. "2 tries," he said. "1, she bargained, already smiling without consent. They did one and stopped on good. He folded the towel into a clean edge and laid it across the chair arm to dry. At the sink, Martin ran water and watched the window fog under his breath. Carla's card lay on the counter, blue ink spelling a name that sounded like a gate that didn't mind opening. He pocketed it without drama. The night thinned around the house. The block let go of some of its noise. From somewhere not far, a swing set took the wind seriously for a moment and answered it back. "Chick." Harrington looked like it had been ironed flat by rain and left to cool. The court wore a thin gloss. Puddles held the sky like cheap mirrors. The oak shook off a necklace of drops, one bead at a time. Somewhere, a siren rehearsed 2 streets over and forgot its line. The swing chains tuned themselves in the wet. "Chick." Eli arrived early with the grocery sack cinched tight under his arm. He set a towel to dry on the backboard brace and pressed its edge with his thumb until the cloth remembered straight lines. The rice jar still sweated through the dishcloth. He set it on the bench and let the steam rise into air that smelled like asphalt and last night's thunder. Socks, belt, tennisball, cocoa butter with its quarter-turn click. Barlow came along the path, shouldering an umbrella that had lost 2 ribs to weather and pride. Under his other arm, a folding card table, a crate of clipboards, and a plastic sleeve of laminated pages that flashed green headers. Francine stayed up, he said, breath fogging. He clicked the table legs open and tested wobble with a knuckle. It behaved. From the crate he lifted a sign like a courthouse placard, Community Movement Consent. First, not clinical care. The QR code sat square and smug at the bottom corner. He wiped it with the hem of his parka and watched water bead off. He lined pens in a pickle jar like fence posts along a property line. Blue, he said. Permanent, rainproof. Why blue? Illy asked. Because black runs, Barlow answered. He tapped one pen, and people argue less when the ink refuses to move. Francine herself appeared a minute later, hood up, clipboard under arm. A kitchen timer looped on her wrist like jewelry. We laminated twice, she announced, laying down guidelines for observers, in language that had been bullied into plain. Ask before filming. Wide frame preferred. Do not obstruct. Do not coach. Stop means stop. She clipped a small sandwich bag of silica gel to the corner, as if to ward off the day, and I brought plastic sleeves for waivers. Rain hates us. Cookies Wednesday. Barlow said, policy. She deadpanned, handing him a sheet protector like an oath. Avery crossed the grass from the street, camera bag slung low. Hat pulled to her eyebrows. She set the sticks and waited, hands in her pockets, until someone said yes. When Martin parked, he didn't swing the SUV too close to the court. He killed the engine, glanced at the oak, and carried Nora through the mist, like the air might steal her. The comet on her chest had dried stiff at the tail. She flicked it and grinned like she'd fixed something that mattered, and no one else could see. Morning, Avery said. Names. She filmed consent on video time. Date. Wide. Nora's quiet. Yes. Martin's. Yes. With a breath on it, she lowered the camera. We good, she said, and pointed the lens at the sign long enough to teach its letters how to live on screen. Nora clocked the blue pens and the plastic sleeves. Fancy, she said. Necessary, Francine said, shelving vanity. She handed a clipboard to Martin. The waiver read the same but looked sturdier behind gloss. He signed, printed, dated, and slid the board back, like he was passing a chess turn. He didn't regret. Eli warmed his hands on the rice and checked with a look that meant, okay to begin. Nora nodded once, chin steady, mouth set in the shape of someone who knows the price, and brought exact change. He laid the packs across her thighs. Steam fogged the sheet protector for a heartbeat. The fog cleared. A jogger in a transparent rain shell drifted within filming distance, phone already aimed at faces. Francine stepped into the beam, raised the "Ask Before Filming" placard like a crossing guard, and held her ground without adding volume. The phone wavered, considered, then tilted to capture the guidelines. Instead, Avery, behind the jogger, widened her frame to swallow the sign. The towel, the jar of pens, context like a witness who never blinks. Can I use the socks? Ely asked Nora. Yes, she said, but only if you tell the tennis ball it's in trouble. Ball, Eli said, placing it under her heel with ceremonial slowness. You're on notice. Barlow's mouth almost smiled. He raised the pickle jar. Blue ink remains undefeated. He said to no one, then stamped the date in the corner of the last signed waiver, the blue rectangle squaring the morning. A city sedan kissed the curb and idled, wipers at half-mast. The driver's door opened on Councilman Royce, in a rain-black coat with a collar that wanted to be a podium. He buttoned it too high, looked right, looked left, and found the camera first, because people like him always do. His aide hustled behind with a tote full of handouts and a smile that couldn't make bail. Royce adjusted his tie in the car window and stepped into the scene at a 45-degree angle calibrated for optics. "Good morning," he said, projecting concern like it carried its own weather. "I've been following this inspiring initiative." Avery pivoted, placed herself in his sight line, and spoke low enough to be polite and loud enough to record. "What line item funds your initiative?" "Councilman. Dollar figure. Fiscal year." He faltered half a beat, which is a century on camera. "Our office is exploring." "Exploring is free," Francine said without looking up, sliding another waiver into a sleeve. "We do receipts." Royce kept the smile, which began to feel like a product with a short shelf life. He tried again, aimed at Martin this time. "As a father myself, standing hour," Martin said, not looking away from Nora's ankle. "You're welcome to watch from behind the sign. We're busy." The aide held up a sheet that said, "Birmingham Moves," in a font that had never gotten damp before. The corner curled. Rain dotted the title until it read, "BM." Oh, Avery didn't take it. She framed the droplet constellation and the curl, held for 2 beats, then rolled on. Royce's phone vibrated in his pocket with the insistence of a conscience dressed as calendar. He checked it like the gesture was casual, and read a name he didn't want to see: city attorney. Subject line, "Re your email." The Miss CC he'd hoped was yesterday's weather had been screenshotted with commentary. He slid the phone away and found an expression he hoped read as concern and not consequence. "Press," Eli told Nora. "Book stamp. Gentle. The author gets mad if you smudge." "Tax code," she said. Because the joke had earned its renewal, she pressed. The sock kept its secrets, but Eli watched her face, saw the small crease between focus and flinch. "Good," he said. Again, he knocked lightly near the patellar tendon. "Feel it." "A little," she said, as if admitting it would cost her later. "That's plenty," he said, and didn't reach for more. Rain thickened to a lace you could wear. Drops gathered on the laminated corner and tried to lift it. Eli pressed it flat with his palm and held until the plastic learned new manners. The QR printed there looked back like a polite eye. A mother with a stroller snapped it and nodded when the guidelines bloomed on her screen like a truth you could carry. From the parking lane, a second car door thumped. Dana came without umbrella, hair already freckled with water. She tucked a folded paper under Francine's elbow, holding statement, hospital letterhead, 6 sentences scrubbed of adjectives. "We celebrate families gathering to support movement. We do not endorse unsupervised care. Trauma-informed clinicians available by appointment." She pointed at the third line. "Swap. Encourage. To. Welcome." She suggested, "Les paternales." Francine nodded, pulled a pen, and corrected the draft in blue. "You're from the hospital," the rain-shell jogger said, emboldened now that the grown-ups had names. "I'm from the part that explains what we do and what we don't," Dana said, shaking water from her cuffs. She clocked Royce. The aide, the handout's font bleeding. "Morning, Councilman." "Dana," he said, like the word might help. "We're aligned in spirit. We print our spirits," she said, fingertip on the waiver sleeve. The aide tried a safer tack. Could we get a quick quote for press? Francine handed him a laminated card that said, "Consent first," on one side and "Say less" on the other. He blinked, looked at the second side, and returned it as if it had burned politely. "Ready?" Ailey asked Nora. He lifted the belt into view. She held his eyes. "Not the strap. Your call." "Not yet," she said. "I want the book to know I'm serious first." "Book. She's serious," Eli told the rain, and the rain pretended it didn't care. A boy with a walker rolled up with his mother. He squinted at the sign, then at the QR, then at the jar of pens like the pens might contain wisdom. "Do I have to sign my whole name?" he asked. "Initials work," Francine said. "Big letters scare lawyers." The boy printed J and R as if they owned the alphabet and handed the board back. Barlow stamped the corner with the date. The blue rectangle looked smug and deserved to "document retained," he said, sliding it into the sleeve. "If the apocalypse asks." Royce edged closer to the towel until his shoes found a puddle, and he stepped back because optics ended at socks. Avery kept him in the frame, but only as background sign foreground. Hands foreground, eyes foreground. He mouthed something to the aide that the rain ate. "Count?" Ailey asked. Nora nodded. "3," she said, and the number wore fewer thorns than last time. Eli steadied her knees with 2 fingers, and a mapmaker's touch. Martin took the belt ends and kept them slack, like slack was his job. "1," she said, and rain ticked on aluminum. 2. The oak shifted water from one limb to another. 3. She lifted, not high, not clean, but honest. The belt flirted with tension. Martin let it refuse to commit. The muscles argued in private and reached a compromise. Nora's breath stuttered and recovered. "Stop," she said, before anything wobbled. "Stopping," Eli answered, already easing. He slid the belt out like you leave a room without waking a baby. Avery let the camera breathe for a full second of quiet and then clipped the shot. She wiped a drop from the lens with the hem of her sleeve and checked the screen sign. Towel, hands, breath. The picture carried weight without needing adjectives. Hospital statement posts at noon. Dana told Francine, "Lead with contact routes. Make it boring." "Boring is how we live," Francine said, sliding the updated draft into a sleeve. She turned to the jogger, who had found his own consent. "Wide frame looks better on rainy days," she offered, as if the weather were in on the plan. Royce lingered 1 beat too long and left in a way that read as retreat, even though he smiled on the way to the sedan. The aide stuffed the bleeding handouts back into the tote. Water freckles like measles across the header. Their taillights stitched red into the mist and then let it go. "Stop on good," Eli said. He patted the towel's edge dry and wrung the dishcloth into the grass, the water darkening a patch that would fade by afternoon. Barlow shelved the clipboards in the crate, slid the sleeves stacked with waivers into a larger envelope, and wrote the date on the tab, square and blue. He tapped the stack twice with a finger. "Receipts," he said, the words soft, like a blessing. They packed the hour down to its bones. Rice cooled into patience. Pen clicked caps. QR codes waited for curious phones. Franco's timer on her wrist beeped once and stopped because she made it. Martin gathered Nora against his coat and started toward the car with a new economy of motion that no film could teach. The rain slackened to a mist that made hair curly and shirts cling. Wind nudged the swing set, as if asking whether it still knew how to speak in weather. The chains answered with the single syllable they keep for days that measure themselves in proofs. Chick. The day began in the key of radiator. Metal ticked as heat climbed the pipes. A thin sun put its shoulder against the blinds, and fail. Coffee turned the kitchen air kind. On the counter, a dish towel lay flat with the reverence of a flag. The jar of rice sat beside it like a hand that had learned how to be warm. Eli stood in the doorway with his grocery sack, hugged to his ribs, and a hesitation that had to be carried like luggage. Martin motioned him in with the easy authority of a man who'd decided to try hospitality as a strategy. "Shoes off if you want," he said, "or don't. The floor has seen worse." Eli toe-heeled out of the duct-taped boots and lined them by the door. His socks didn't match one gray, one a faded orange that remembered Halloween. The guest room had been aired, the spare sheets smoothed to erase the crease of waiting. On the desk, a glass of water, a yellow pencil, and an index card with the Wi-Fi written in block letters that trusted clarity more than secrecy. Carla arrived with a scarf that had lost a fight with the wind and a folder that had won others. "All right, Hales," she said, setting her coffee on a coaster and the folder on the table. "We're going to make this less precarious." She flipped to the top form with the satisfaction of a dealer who knows the cards are good. Caregiver affidavit. Names, dates, the line that matters, temporary authority for medical decisions with parental absence or unavailability. Blue ink, she added. Print clean. Sign where the arrow flirts with you. Martin signed. The pen wrote like it had gravity. Carla turned the page. Medical consent for minor physical therapy OT evaluation adjunct. She tapped the paragraph that carved a lane between care and treatment. This says eyes on, hands off without consent, and no needles. Never. No way. She slid a second copy across. One for your records. One for mine. I retain electronically. She smiled at Eli. Small and exact. You're allowed to say no to everything, including me. Eli nodded once like someone acknowledging weather. Carla pulled a stapled packet with a green header. McKinney Vento. The words tasted bureaucratic and life-saving. If he stays longer and school is a thing, this gives you an on-ramp, transportation, enrollment, without a permanent address, she said, already underlining dates. Call the liaison. Tell them, I told you to be annoying. They'll thank you later. Nora rolled to the doorway, braid crooked, comet sweatshirt now with a juice stain that looked like Nevada. She watched the pen move and the paper accept it. What's that one? She asked. The one that tells the grown-ups to treat him like a person. Carla said. She capped the pen with a click. You like cookies. Nora weighed the trap. If they're policy, she said. Best kind. Carla replied, and snapped the folder closed, as if the job had integrity that would hold. The house settled around the decision. Eli set his sack on the guest bed and pulled out his small universe towel, socks, belt, cocoa butter, a tennis ball, and placed each object in a drawer as if drawers were something he could trust. He touched the edge of the desk once, the way you pat a dog that might be yours someday. Afternoon arrived with the sound of inboxes. Martin sat at the home office desk and watched subject lines try out their faces. One client's email wore the cologne of apology. We're making branding-sensitive choices for the quarter. He stared at the sentence until the empty praise behind it grew tired and left. Another message from an old account sent a single sentence that had warmth like a stove. Invoice late is fine. Your new project matters. He smoothed the page of his legal pad until the paper squeaked. The doorbell rang with the startled tone of a house that seldom performs. A package with a local station's return address waited on the mat. A link printed on cardstock. 2 names. 3 lines. We'd like to tell the story. Fast. Martin set it on the counter, breathed in through his teeth, and moved it under the bowl of lemons, as if citrus could quarantine intention. At 3, the internet tried to eat Eli. A neighborhood page posted a dossier screen-grabbed yearbook photos, a fuzzy clip of his mother in a church basement, comment strings that grew hooks, unlicensed, reckless, where's the oversight? Someone used feral, like it was a neutral word. A few called him a miracle, a few more called him a headline. The worst called him nothing, and the nothing hurt with a shape. Avery texted before Martin could. I see it. Don't feed it. Long cut going live. Wide. Consent on cam. Receipts only. 10 minutes later. Her post landed like a slow answer sign in frame. Waivers in sleeves. Nora's. Yes. On video. Eli's hands visible until invited. The caption refused to raise its voice. Context. Consent. Community. No saints. No witches. She pinned the line about stopping on. No. And logged moderator notes in the clear. The comments fought as commend do. Under Avery's cut, a night nurse wrote, I walk past him on Saturdays. He asks before touch, thanks me for holding doors. The janitor added a dot. Kid says morning to the mops. It should have been nothing. It felt like proof. Nora watched the internet scuffle from the living room and rolled over to the counter where the lemons hid the invitation. She moved the bowl without being asked. Are we doing the story? She asked. We're doing dinner, Martin said, more brittle than he meant, and softened it with garlic. Oil hit pan, spoke the language of hunger, and filled the house with a domestic argument the internet couldn't join. After dishes, the ritual held, towel warmed on the radiator, cocoa butter turned a quarter, socks ready, like truce flags. One try, Nora said. Chin up. Stop on good. Eli returned. They did one, and the room applauded by staying quiet. The towel kept the heat. It could. Eli folded the residue into the drawer with a care that looked like belonging. The night worked at the window frames. The street traded its traffic for a leaner murmur. Martin stayed up to send 2 emails. One he hated, one he wanted. The first to the client who had left the polite refusal of a man who won't chase a moving target, the second to a pro bono coordinator at a small firm he'd donated to once and never walked into. If you have a case for a family that can't pay, send it. I have bandwidth I didn't ask for. He hit send and watched the message leave like a small animal that might, against odds, bring something back. He turned and found Eli at the doorway with his notebook and a face that had learned how not to ask for anything. Room okay, Martin said. It has a desk, Eli said, as if desks were whales. He looked at the filed forms on the table, the cool blue ink that would not run. Are those mine? They make it easier to say yes, Martin said. He hesitated, then added the truth. They make it easier to say no, too. Eli nodded. He set the composition book on the table and opened to a page where a hand was drawn in light strokes, the pads of fingers shaded like memory. He traced the outline with a pencil that wanted sharpening and didn't complain. Do you think she'd like this house? He asked, voice small enough to fold. She'd fix the squeak in the back door. Martin said, without having met her. He took a small bottle of 3 in 1 oil from a drawer and set it beside the notebook like a joke with a job. Tomorrow. The doorbell rang again. Shy this time. Avery. She didn't cross the threshold. She hovered in the porch light, rain making a constellation on her coat. I dropped off USBs, she said, holding up a zip bag. Full res long cut. No narration. Consent waved like flags. She looked past Martin into the warm rectangle of the kitchen and the small boy at the table drawing a hinge into a hand. I can run interference on the station, she added. If you want to say no and stay smart, we want boring. Martin said, boring sounds safe. Boring wins. Avery agreed. She passed him the bag. Blue ink looks good on camera for what it's worth. It's all it's worth, he said. And that, strangely, felt like enough. When the house had put its cups away and the breathing had gone to a night rhythm, the smear page posted a second wave. Someone dug up a grainy clip of Monique Carter, bending over a veteran's ankle while towels steamed on a radiator. The caption did what captions do when they want blood. Unlicensed hands on a patient. The comments arrived prepared to throw chairs. Avery posted the unedited original, no captions. No music, just a church basement, a winter coat, a woman working with consent. You could hear, and patience, you could count. In the background, a child laughed once and tried to choke the sound, then laughed again. Under it, Avery wrote, "Wide frame. Say less." She went to bed with her phone in the other room like a person who has learned the difference between vigilance and harm. Near midnight, the house gathered its wood and tried on quiet. The guest room smelled like laundry and something new. Eli lay awake and counted the noises that meant safety, the water heater thinking, the refrigerator correcting itself, a clock that didn't insist. He took the composition book from under his pillow, drew a square in the margin, and wrote receipts in letters that knew their edges. He tucked Carla's copy of the affidavit behind the cover and tapped it twice down the hall. Martin stood at the back door and touched the hinge with the pad of his thumb. The metal was dusty, unbothered. He placed a drop of oil on the pin and worked the door open and shut until the sound lost its complaint and became a function. The house thanked him by not saying so. From the park, 2 streets away, where the swing slept, and the oak kept its own counsel, Wind pressed one more test against the chain. The answer came clean, patient, ordinary. Chick. Wind sanded the morning down to its grain. The park smelled like wet iron and winter grass. A low sky pressed close enough to touch. The color of an old sink. The swing stirred, then stilled, then tried again. Chick. Barlow hauled out the crate and the folding table with the stoicism of a man who had learned to argue with weather through hardware. Francine trailed him with a plastic tub labeled Forms Incident Consent Observer, her wrist timer clicking softly like a cricket. Eli laid the towel on concrete that held the last of the night's chill. Steam uncurled from the rice pack, as if relieved to have work. Blue pens stood in a jar like soldiers who understood paperwork wins wars. A sedan idled half a block down. Inside, a woman watched with hands at 10 and 2, and a face gone careful. When she stepped out, the county windbreaker made the rain bead and slide. Carla walked to the sign, scanned the guidelines with her eyes like she was checking a heart rate, then angled herself where she could see without becoming a fact. Martin rolled Nora up in a knit cap and the Comet sweatshirt that had survived dishes and dignity. Nora stared past the towel at the oak's dark bark and worked her jaw like someone pre-chewing a question. Same rules, Eli said, warming his palms. Stop on good, she said, and it sounded less like a slogan and more like a boundary. More cars, more mothers. The boy with the walker swung in wide and parked like a pro. A new kid arrived, a first-timer in a camo hoodie, knees knocking together with nerves or cold or both. His dad's mouth was set to "Don't show fear," which is a lousy setting for mornings. Waivers slid into sleeves with the neat friction of systems behaving. Francine date stamped each corner blue ink. Square. Undeniable. Avery framed the table, the sign, the jar, the belt coiled like a serpent that had learned manners. Question, called a woman from the path, voice tight. She wore a cross on a silver chain, and the posture of someone who had sat with harm and didn't trust promises. Who's responsible if something goes wrong? Barlow didn't blink. We log an incident report, he said, tapping the tub. Call 911 if indicated. Parents keep custody of every decision. We do not diagnose or treat. We stop on no. One, the woman looked at Nora, then at the belt, then back to the sign. Her face stayed wary, but she took a seat under the oak. Observer, not opponent. Dana appeared at her side like a weather front. No umbrella, hair beaded. You can sit with me? She said. I'll show you where the edges are. Ready? Ailey asked Nora, and she nodded. He placed the rice across her thighs. Cocoa butter flashed a sweet warmth into air that tried to pretend it didn't care. The sock went on with its whispering dignity. The tennis ball rolled under heel, like a coin returning to a pocket that knows it. Press the book, he said. Tax code, she said, then added, lightly, as if warning a librarian. She pressed. The ball moved, just enough to report in. Eli watched that crease between focus and fear, and saw only focus. Good, he said. Again, Martin held his breath like a party trick. He couldn't stop performing. Near the 3-minute mark, the camo hoodie kid with jittery knees asked if he could try the strap. Eli showed the belt, then faced the boy's father instead. He says, stop. We stop. You say, stop. We stop. I say, stop. We stop. I understand, the father said, knuckles white on the walker's grips. We sign first, Francine reminded, already holding out a clipboard. Blue initials appeared, lean and shaky. The father's signature marched in behind them like backup. The belt slid under the kid's knees. Eli placed 2 fingers at the patella, like a cartographer tapping a map. Count is yours. 1. The kid breathed. The belt stayed slack. 2. His jaw twitched. 3. He lifted too fast. A flare of effort chasing dignity. And the world did what worlds do when friction and ambition break even. The chair slid a whisper. His heel lost purchase. His hands grabbed air. His chin kissed the asphalt hard enough to echo. Everything condensed. Stop, Eli said first, hands already up, voice flat, hands off. Francine's timer beeped because she pressed it, and not because it knew. Airway, Dana said, kneeling, gloved by magic, because nurses always are. Look at me, buddy. You with me? Blood brightened at the lip like a new idea. The kid blinked twice and found tears he didn't consent to. Bleeding control, Dana added, and Francine handed over gauze from a pouch that existed because it had to. 900 on deck, Barlow asked. Phone out. Thumb. Above the green. Wait, Dana said, eyes on the boy's pupils. Voice even. No LOC. Lip laceration. No teeth loose. We can ride with parent to urgent care. Faster than an ambulance for this. Copy. Barlow said, lowering the phone. He lifted a blue clipboard from the tub labeled Incident and began to write, the pen skating sure. Time, location, names, what occurred, by whom observed, actions taken, parental décision. A box marked, consent reaffirmed. Got it square. The weather had a line. He wrote, overcast, damp surface. Because facts wear jackets. Avery stayed wide, no face tight, sign and sleeves in frame. She filmed the card table where incident report copy to parent sat legible. Honest, she found Martin's hand hovering and cut away before pity became content. The father knelt to eye level with his boy, one hand at the back of the neck in a hold that read as, I have you. We're going to urgent care, he said. Then ice cream. The boy tried to yuck a bloody laugh and winced. Cookies are policy, he said, lip thick. Then policy, the father said, and the joke built a bridge over the minute. Carla stepped in as the current slowed. I need a note that parent refused ambulance transport after nurse assessment, she said. not because she doubted them, but because paper knows how to hold ambiguity better than memory. Francine pulled a pre-printed line from the tub and slid it under the blue. The father signed, date stamped, initialed. Avery caught the stamp, the hand, the line. She caught Dana dropping used gauze in a red bag marked biohazard, because systems run on color. Okay, Eli asked the kid after the bleeding wore itself down to manageable. The kid nodded, then glared at the belt like it had ideas above its station. Your call next time, Eli said. Your timeline. The crowd exhaled. The woman under the oak, the one with the cross and the tight face, stood and stepped closer. Thank you for not pretending it didn't happen, she said, to the air and to the people who had let air exist. My sister's kid, somebody told him to push through the pain. It didn't end well. Her eyes watered in the way that wants to be weather. This is different. Because the rules are boring, Dana said without apology. Boring keeps you alive, Francine said, snapping the incident report's little brass clip like a period. The father and boy headed for the car, gauze in place, waiver copy in a plastic sleeve, incident report duplicate tucked behind it, urgent care address texted to a phone that buzzed with gratitude. Barlow walked them to the curb and watched until the taillights made a promise and turned. A ping rattled Royce's pocket, where he stood in the drift just off camera. He had returned because optics caress ego even on bad days. He read the email. He feared, FW, your DM from last night circulating. Screenshots stacked like charges. The Miss CC about staging a statement had grown commentary and memes. He put on a face that had weathered smaller storms and squared his shoulders to the lens. But Avery had already moved. The frame held sign, towel, car, consent. His mouth opened in the corner and closed again like a fish boring itself. Temporary pause. Suggested a city parks council in Barlow's ear. The question delivered as sentence, 1 week freeze, pending review. Barlow scanned the scene, signed waivers, incident report complete, parent choice, documented, nurse assessment, a line that could be read twice and still say the same thing. No, he said, we tighten, we don't vanish. He lifted a roll from the tub, privacy tarp blue. He hooked it to the portable stanchions they'd bought with petty cash and faith, and created a soft wall against curiosity. We add eyes, he said, not curtains. Dana's phone shook with a call from legal. She listened, said, understood, twice, and hung up. She turned to Francine. We post the holding statement now. Lead with roots for urgent care. Add a line for incident reporting. No adjectives, no heroes. Francine typed with 2 thumbs and the calm of someone who knows punctuation is triage. She hit post. The hospital's logo went up next to words that could pass an audit. Comments began their complicated dance. At the edge of the court, Nora watched the boy's blood dry to a dark comma on the asphalt, and did the math only kids do. Danger equals every possible future. Eli knelt beside her without touching. You want to stop? He offered. She shook her head once. I want to count slower. Okay, he said. He set the belt far away like you put knives out of reach before you answer the door. We'll do socks only. Book stamp. 2 tries. She pressed. The ball listened. Her face didn't break. Good, he said. Now we stop on good. They ended early. Barlow sealed the incident report in a plastic envelope, labeled it Copy Parent, Copy City, and set both in places where they could be found. Carla photographed the report with a county phone that knew exactly where it was. Chain of custody, she said, even for paper. Avery packed slow. She shot one last wide sign. Blue tarp. Puddles. Oak then lowered the camera. I'll post the boring cut, she said to no one and to everyone. No music. No zooms. Receipts first. Royce considered approaching, and then didn't. The aides shifted from foot to foot. Hugging an empty tote like a pillow, they left without ceremony. Rain stippling their coat shoulders into camouflage. By noon the urgent care had stitched the boy's lip with 2 neat knots and a sticker bribed from a drawer. The father texted Barlow a photo of a thumbs up and a receipt for a milkshake. Barlow printed the photo and stapled it to the incident copy because narrative likes to attach to facts. Martin buckled Nora into the SUV with hands that had learned restraint. "You good?" he asked. "I hate the belt," she said. "Me too," he said, and they let it be true. Cloud rolled east, and a thin light split the court into damp and dry. Eli gathered the towel, the socks, the belt coiled smaller than before. He pressed the laminated corner flat and held it until the plastic accepted its place. The swings took a breath and spoke in a voice just above the weather, ordinary and precise. The sound of a hinge choosing not to fail. Chick. Rain arrived sideways, needling the porch light into a halo that couldn't hold. The house breathed its evening radiator ticks. Dishwater glugging the last, the soft complaint of a dryer that wanted retirement. Martin set 2 mugs on the counter. Lemon steam climbed. Nora practiced a knot with a shoelace and a patience that looked borrowed. The doorbell cut the kitchen in half. Not the neighbor's bell ring, the official kind, too short. One long like a knock that brought witnesses. Martin wiped his hands, smoothed his shirt without thinking, and opened to a pair of silhouettes. A woman with a county lanyard, and a man with a badge on a clip, and the posture of security that has read every policy twice. "Evening," the woman said. Water ran off her hood in clear lines. "Carla Martinez, Child Protective Services." She lifted the badge only as high as conversation required. "This is Mr. Lopez from Hospital Security." Martin stepped back because refusing an introduction makes a house small. "Come in," he said. "Shoes if you want, or not." They wiped at the mat. Lopez's boots gave the mud back politely. The entry smelled like wet nylon and lemon, like truth prepared itself in citrus. Eli came from the hall, notebook under his arm like a shield and a book, eyes cautious without apology. Carla moved to a table cleared of everything but a pen and space. "I'm sorry to late drop," she began. Soft. "We got 2 intakes. One anonymous alleging a minor performing therapy. One from a relative of a patient concerned sincere." She slid a paper forward, not dramatic, just steady. "Acknowledgement of home visit voluntary. Blue box for signature. Date. Time. You can refuse entry. If you say not tonight, I schedule a day visit. There's no court order." Martin looked at Eli. The boy's knuckles whitened on the notebook and then remembered color. "We can do it," Martin said, "because saying no to the gate you want to open creates a different kind of storm. Scope is narrow." Carla said. "Sleeping arrangements, food in the house, educational plan in motion, and I need to see any records relevant to the park activity." She turned to Eli. "If you want me to leave at any point, you say the word, I stop." Eli nodded once. "Stop," he tested, as if tasting a familiar fruit under new light. Lopez kept his hands visible. "I'm here as a witness," he said. "Chain of custody. If we copy anything, in and out." The tour was the kind of quiet that reveals a home. Guest room with a bed made twice, a desk with a yellow pencil sharpened far, a glass that had not been drunk from, a card with Wi-Fi in block letters, closet with 3 shirts, and the dignity of space for more, kitchen with a bowl of lemons like a religion, dry goods lined like a parade that hadn't started, fridge held the staples and the promise of tomorrow, eggs, Milk, Ahar label, rice do not eat. In a child's print, bathroom clean as intent. Education, Carla asked. Martin lifted the green packet. McKinney, Vento initiated, he said. Email to liaison sent. They asked for 2 weeks to place. Will be annoying. Carla wrote. Annoying equals good. In the margin, she looked at Eli. You sleeping okay? He shrugged with a shoulder that didn't want to confess. The clock ticks. That's a friendly sound, she said. Where I come from, back at the table, Carla opened a slim folder with pre-printed lines that made room for nuance. Okay, she said. Next, any notes related to what happens at the park. Not because we suspect harm, because keeping records safe protects you. She nodded at the composition book in Eli's grip. May I see? Eli held the notebook to his chest. Reflex. Not strategy, then, eased it down like a fragile animal. The cover had softened at the corners from being believed in. He slid it forward. You can look, he said. But not take. That's your right, Carla said. She pulled on thin gloves with a whispering snap and opened near the back. Diagrams marched in pencil and smudges, knees like moons, arrows with gentle opinions, notes in a small hand. Ask first. Stop on good, no machines. Heat, then move. A page held a hand sketched in soft lines. The pads, shaded like memory, would burn through if you pressed too hard. Lopez set a portable scanner on the table, small as a shoebox, cable bright. I'll make copies in your kitchen so nothing leaves the premises, he said, narrating process, the way people breathe around skittish dogs. One for CPS, one for you, one sealed for the park file. We'll label, timestamp, sign across seal. You watch my hands, or you run it yourself. I'll watch. Eli said. He rubbed the corner of the page with his thumb and left a faint shine. Lopez fed the first sheet with reverent fingers. The scanner hummed an airline lullaby and spit out a crisp rectangle. Carla wrote the time in the upper right, blue and exact. Martin initialed. The kitchen was still enough to hear the radiator change its mind. The next page went smoother. The third slid in and stopped. A wet cough of gears. The paper stuttered. The sound of a jam is small and final. Lopez froze with his fingers on the feed. I'm stopping, he said, without moving. He pressed the release lever. Nothing yielded. We don't yank, he said. He looked to Eli, then Carla. With your permission, I'll open the panel. Eli's fingers twitched and then flattened. Okay, he said, in a voice the house hadn't heard from him. Lopez popped the side. The jam revealed itself. The page with the soft hand had gone in slightly crooked. The edge grabbed and chewed. Half showed, half swallowed. The graphite line meant to be a palm now looked like surf. I'm sorry, Lopez said, and the words meant something without performance. We can salvage part. He slid a clean tweezer from the kit he carried, because of days like this, lifted the corner like a splinter, and coaxed it free in patient increments. The paper came out torn in a shape that would never be whole again. Eli didn't speak. He did not cry. He watched, then reached, then pulled back, then reached again. He set the torn page on the table and smoothed it with the side of his hand. The graphite smudge came off on his skin like old newsprint. He looked at his palm and then at the ripped line where fingers had once been. Carla didn't rush into comfort. She produced a zip-top bag, plain and waiting, and held it open. We can preserve what's left, she said. Your artifact, not our evidence. Label it how you want. Eli slid the paper in. He wrote on the bag with the blue pen. Mom's hand broken keep. The letters sat stubborn and true. He capped the pen and left a faint blue dot on his thumb. Lopez printed a chain of custody sticker and didn't use it. No seal, he said. It's yours. He slid 3 blank sleeves forward. We can copy what can be copied. We can stop. Eli pulled the notebook back, flipped past drawings to a section of blank pages that had been waiting for some other life. He breathed once, twice. Then he passed it across again. We finish, he said, and then we scan all of it. Everything. He looked at Martin. So it doesn't live in just one place. That's a good place to live, Carla said, writing. Digitize. With a star, harder to break 1,000 doors. They built a new habit, Lopez fed. Carla stamped. Martin initialed. Ellie watched. The torn page lay in its bag between the bowls and the lemons, like a relic and a lesson. Nora drifted in on her chair and set a warm dish towel on Eli's wrist without talking. He laid his fingers on the heat, like he was telling them to remember what soft felt like. When the last copy slid out, Lopez printed a cover sheet for each set. Notebook selections Eli C. 19472011. He wrote the address and the words, "Made on premises." He signed the bottom and offered the pen. Carla countersigned. Martin added the clean, rectangular letters of his name. Eli printed only Eli, then a small dot, where a last name might go or not. Lopez placed one packet in a manila envelope, one in a second, and left the third unsealed for Martin's drawer. "Thank you for letting us in," Carla said, packing slow, not easing toward the door until the house said yes. "You can call me for anything. Doesn't have to be official. I answer at night because people need help at night." Eli lifted his eyes from the bag with the wrecked drawing. "Do you ever fix the bad pages?" he asked. "Sometimes we stop them from tearing worse," she said. "Sometimes we make better copies of the ones still whole." She tucked a card near the lemons. "Both count." Lopez hesitated at the threshold. The back door had that polite squeak it had been practicing less of. He looked at the hinge. Martin looked at the oil. "Want me to?" "Already did," Martin said, and opened the door twice to show the sound had turned into function. Lopez nodded like men do at solved problems and tipped 2 fingers. They left without ceremony. The porch swallowed the water falling from their coats. The door closed like a page turned, and not a book slammed. The house resumed its smaller volume. Martin slid the unsealed packet into the desk drawer beside the insurance and the birth certificate copies that win arguments. He put the bagged page on the mantel without candles. It sat like a knuckle against air. Avery texted at an hour that suggested caution. "Station wants a bite. I can run the no for you." Boring statement is posted. Comment section is wearing itself out. Martin thumbed back. "Say less." She replied with a period that carried more than most sentences. Nora rolled her chair close to Eli and placed the shoelace knot in his hand. "You can keep that," she said. "It doesn't break easy." He rotated the knot, felt where it locked and where it gave. "Good design," he said. "Policy," she said. Deadpan. And he almost smiled, the kind you save for later. They warmed the rice and set the towel on the arm of the couch, not to work, to be warm, where warmth would be noticed. Eli opened the notebook to a brand new page and didn't draw a hand. He sketched a hinge instead, a simple pin and 2 leaves, and shaded the places that wanted oil. He wrote, "Breathe here," in tiny letters near the pin. Martin watched from the kitchen, turned the lemon in his palm like a small, yellow sun, and let it sit back in the bowl. Outside, the wind pushed against the neighborhood in a long, even shove. The park, 2 streets over, took the pressure and gave an answer. The swings had been practicing all week, small, stubborn, clear, the kind of sound that doesn't argue with weather, the kind you can keep. Chick. The park wore a Sunday hush like a pressed shirt, clouds thin to gauze. Light sifted through and found the puddles, turning them into coin. Air tasted like metal, sweetened by damp leaves. The swing chains breathed once to check their voice and decided it would do. Chick. Barlow rolled a dolly stacked with stanchions and the blue privacy tarp, the crate of clipboards wedged beneath, a thermos rattling like a good idea. Francine matched him with a lidded tub. PT, Observer Sign-Up ID Check, Code of Conduct, a neat title in blue that would outlive weather. Eli arrived with the towel, rice, socks, belt, cocoa butter, and the laminated rule board whose corners had learned to lie flat. Avery came early and walked the court like a crew chief. She stood where the oak framed the bench and measured sight lines with 2 fingers and a squint. The tripod feet found their pits and settled, the head leveled, the camera shouldered wide enough to swallow sign. Towel. Ben Yar. Faces, if faces said yes. Ambient only, she told herself. Lens cap and teeth. No music. No saints. Cars began to bead the curb. Parents set bags on bleachers and unzipped only what they would use. 2 physical therapists from the hospital, invited through Dana's dull, perfect statement, arrived side by side, lanyards tucked away as a gesture, not a surrender. Observers. One said, palms visible, not hands, sign here. Francine said, sliding the clipboard, read and agree, no coaching, no touching, stop on no. A blue. The PTs read like readers and wrote their names with the precision of people who have lived in charting software too long. Martin's SUV nosed in and parked crooked enough to be forgiveness. He lifted Nora from the back seat and stood a moment without moving, as if his body had to remember which part of the world did gravity and which did trust. Nora wore black leggings, a sweatshirt with a tiny stitched star at the cuff, and a determined mouth. Her braid had been redone twice. The third time had held morning, Eli said, and the word meant temperature, not time. Morning, she said back, and gave him a look he'd earned. We do this. On our terms, Barlow posted the blue tarp along the stanchions at the court's south edge. It made a soft wall, neither fortress nor theater. Avery framed it into the wide, so privacy wasn't an edit trick. Francine checked the pawn. PT Observer. List again, and clipped it to the table. We're at 10 slots, she said. 2 per week. Wet list acts right. Dana arrived without announcement. Sleeve pushed. Hair already collecting sunlight. Urgent care report from yesterday's fall. Scanned and filed, she said to Barlow. Neutral. No complications. The kid asked if stitches counted as extra credit. Policy says yes, Barlow said, deadpan. He poured coffee from the thermos and pushed a lid across. No cream. Cream is politics. A city car took the corner too fast and corrected at the curb. Royce stepped out with a tie that pretended rain had never happened. His aide shadowed him with a tote and a smile that had quit halfway through the job. The councilman saw the camera, squared his shoulders, and walked, like walking was a press release. Avery did not pan to catch him. She let him find the edge of the frame and stay there, a moving background. Consent, she asked Martin and Nora. Camera down. Voice low. They nodded time. Date. Wide shot. And she captured the agreement, the rule board in same frame, like an affidavit you can hear. She set the lens and let the day be itself. Eli warmed the rice and laid the packs across Nora's thighs. Steam curled. Cocoa butter swung sweet in the air. Socks slid on with their quiet dignity. Same rules, he said. Stop on good. Belt only if it asks to be here. It can wait outside, she said. Eyes on the strap. It can wait, he said, and put it on the towel. Folded small. A murmur ran the bleachers. The boy with the walker, lip newly stitched, raised a straw like a sword and set it down again. embarrassed by his own ceremony. His father saluted the rule board and sat, hands open, elbows on knees, a posture that read as belief without expectation. Francine's timer ticked nothing into the morning. "We'll begin," Barlow announced to no one and everyone, the way a marshal calls a 5 kelvins and then moves the cones. He glanced toward the blue tarp and checked its lines. It held, "Press the book," Eli said. "Tax code," Nora said, out of habit, then breathed and changed it. "A picture book someone made too boring. Flat colors," he said. "Terrible font," she pressed. The tennis ball moved the width of a pinion. Eli watched the crease between focus and fear. Saw focus, let fear stay out where wind could thin it. "Again," he said, and his voice wore oil. Avery kept the frame honest. Wide on sign. Towel. Hands. Breath. The audio took birds and breath, and one cough that pretended it was background. On the grass beyond, Royce hovered in the shallow of the shot, then paced, then whispered to his aide, who checked a phone and made a face. They were getting the emails he'd hoped to outrun. "Your DM is out. Your phrasing is unfortunate. Call us." He smoothed his tie and smiled anyway. "Belt?" Eli asked Nora, not offering the thing, only the choice. "Not yet," she said. "I want to see if the book gets jealous." He nodded and shifted a rice pack lower. "Book? She's more interesting than you," he told the air, and someone snorted into their sleeve like it mattered. She pressed. The sock whispered a second syllable, a yes without decoration. Eli set 2 fingers at her knees and mapped them without moving them. "Count," he said. She didn't answer. She closed her eyes and steadied her jaw. When she spoke, it came from somewhere below the part of the body that tells jokes. "1," she said, and the chain over the swings gave a soft answer. "2," she said, and Martin's fingers flexed around breath. He didn't notice until he did. 3. The world pivoted 1 degree. Nora rose. Not far, not long. The line of her legs drew a new sentence. Eli steadied without helping. The belt stayed still where it waited, like a dog who'd finally learned sit means sit. The therapists invited, uneasy, leaned forward a hair, and then sat back, as if reminded by the blue at their necks that watching was part of work. "Stop," she said, before wobble became drama. "Stopping," he said, hand already away. He slid the socks down a fraction to change surface, then up again to give the brain 2 maps. "Again when you call it." Royce took 2 steps toward the towel and met Barlow's chest by accident, and then design. "Line starts behind the sign." "Councilman," Barlow said. "Polichas policy." Royce looked over his shoulder at Avery's lens, which had not sought him, and smiled a smile that had done good work with easier lighting. "Our office would like to provide budget figure," Avery asked from her wide eyes, never leaving the level. "Fiscal year. Vendor list." She said it like ordering at a diner, clear, gentle, impossible to evade. The aide produced a glossy 1-sheet dripping with Birmingham moves and rain history. The corner curled like an admission. Francine accepted it with 2 fingers, slid it under the jar of pens, and waited to see if it leaked. "Again," Nora said, and her voice put a hand on its own shoulder. "Slower. Your tempo," Eli said. He moved his fingers to the tendon's edge without trespassing. "Map, not motor," she pressed. The quiver that had defined failure last month now read as signal. She found a path around it, like a city driver who knows the one alley where traffic gives up. Her knees unglued. Her torso lifted because it wanted to see what legs were doing. She stood. Wind went quiet to listen. Martin moved his hands under her arms, and then stopped them like a man who'd learned to obey his own rule. The belt lay still, insulted and obedient. The therapists went still, the kind of still that knows when to applaud is later. The boy with the stitches forgot his straw and bit his lip, winced, and grinned. Anyway, Avery held the shot one count longer than breath. You could see the cool on the air, the fog at Nora's mouth, the shimmer on the rice pack where heat met fact. She pulled out half an inch on the zoom to keep the sign and the pens in the left edge, like a lawyer walking a jury through chain of custody. Then she let the camera breathe. Take one, Eli whispered. Nora stepped. The right foot slid forward the width of a brave idea and found ground. She laughed, short and shot. Again, she said to her own legs, as if they were kids at recess. Left foot, a small, slow victory. Third step wanted to be drama and chose dignity. She started to tip, and Martin reached, and she fell into the safe that had been waiting behind her since Hope's first draft. He held her and shook. Kid. She cried and laughed like she'd never been told she couldn't do two things at once. Eli sat back without falling and put his palms on his knees because the world is heavy, and that's a way to carry it. The bleachers made a sound crowds make when they forget they're supposed to be reasonable. The therapists clapped once, then twice, and then pressed hands to pockets like they were fixing a shirt. Dana closed her eyes for half a second. A prayer without deity, just gratitude for boring rules that make miracles not accidents. Roy stepped forward to find light on his face and got stanchion and tarp instead. Barlow's palm hovering near. No? His phone chimed again, city attorney. Subject: ARI-DM language ethics. And the aide's expression moved into the neighborhood of panic. He tilted the glossy one sheet toward the ground and read the rain back like it was numbers. Stop on good, Eli said to Nora, and she said, stop, back, and it sounded like, yes, in a winter dialect. Francine slid a clipboard to the PTs. If you want to observe next week, slots open at noon, she said. You bring eyes and boring shoes. Leave opinions in the car. Understood, one said, then glanced at Nora and found her attention on her own knees, which was the entire point. Cookies Wednesday, Barlow announced to the air, stamping the top of the day's last waiver with a blue rectangle, the size of a promise. Policy insists. The hour unspooled into small work. Socks off. Rice cooling. Pens capping. Avery let the audio run on the breath and the rustle and the soft strangeness of a park acting like a courthouse. She cut only to protect, never to polish. When a stranger lifted a phone at face height, Francine stepped into the shot with the "Ask Before Filming" sign and a look that invited compliance, not conversion. The phone lowered. The moment remained itself. At the fringes, two reporters from stations that preferred the word miracle to words like protocol drifted, looked at Avery's wide, looked at the sign in frame, and recalibrated angles. Dana handed each a half-sheet routes to urgent care, hours for supervised PT consults, a number to call. Before using adjectives, one reporter pocketed it with respect, the other with resentment. Both said, "Thank you like weather." Royce checked his phone and found the thread he feared had become a rope screenshots of his misCC'd DM paired with captions he could not control. He opened his mouth to offer a quote and watched Avery's lens not move. He closed it. The aide put the tote in the trunk without meeting anyone's eyes. The sedan left as if convinced the turn signal had been optional. Martin wrapped Nora in the blanket and set her on the chair like a crown returned to the box. You stood, he said, middle school simple, because language sometimes needs to be small to fit inside the chest. I stood, she said, as if the word might chip a tooth if she bit it wrong. She leaned toward Eli. You told the book I was interesting. It's a terrible book, he said, and the laugh cracked what was left of the cold. People lingered and didn't. The urge to speechify flickered and died under the tarp. which was a mercy. Eli packed slow, folding the towels so the damp footprint stayed in the center. He set it on the backboard brace and didn't take it down. "We forgot something." He told no one, which is how you keep a thing without owning it. Avery shut the lens, checked the card, checked it again. She taped a note to her own brain. Post. Duel. Leave verbs. Show rules. She hoisted the sticks and caught Barlow stacking stanchions 2 at a time, like a man who believed his back more than he should. "You want help?" she asked. "Union says I must accept," he said, and handed her one, and they carried the blue between them, like a flag for a country that only existed in places like this. Light leaned warmer, then not. The crowd thinned to cars that started the way tired hands do 2 tries. A cough. Resolve. The oak shook out a last glitter of water. The swing set faced the quiet and gave its answer clean. Ordinary. Bright as a small nail-driven true. Chick. City Hall smelled like floor wax and paperwork. Light came through tall glass in obedient squares, dust motes afloat like unfiled thoughts. The marble steps held the chill of old arguments. Down the corridor, a brass door closer exhaled each time somebody entered, a mechanical sigh that knew how long a meeting should last. Barlow signed the attendance sheet in blue and handed the pen to Martin. Special Session Public Comment Community Movement at Harrington Park. A printed agenda waited on a table beside a bowl of mints that tasted like meetings. Francine clipped today's waivers names of observers, 2 PTs, Anurse, parents into a slim binder and set it on the second row seat, like a sacred text that tolerated coffee rings. A volunteer taped up the rules for public comment. 3 minutes. No personal attacks. Ada mic available. This is part of the public record. A court reporter adjusted a small machine in front of the dais and flexed her fingers. A sign language interpreter warmed her hands and found a place to see faces. Ely came last, composition book at his spine under the hoodie. Hair damp from rain that had stopped trying. The bagged, torn page, Mom's hand broken keep, stayed at home on the mantel on purpose. He paused at the entrance, breath fogging a rectangle on the glass, and watched it vanish. He touched the hinge with a fingertip dry, stiff, promising noise, and let his hand fall. Royce entered through the side door like a man who'd learned the trick of not walking in front of cameras until he'd decided what face to wear. The aide hovered, tote heavy with printouts. Council members took their seats, nameplates tidy, microphones on their little goosenecks like curious birds. A gavel tapped the wood with a sound that made people sit up even if they weren't sure why. "We're here to listen," the chair said, voice set to even. "We'll post the recording and minutes within 72 hours. First, the hospital." Dana stood at the fixed mic and adjusted it down an inch. She placed a single sheet on the lectern, 6 lines, no adjectives. "We support families gathering in public spaces. We do not authorize unsupervised clinical care. We have implemented an observer program for licensed therapists, posted routes to urgent care, and shared a contact number for incident reporting. We are committed to boring statements that help." She looked at the chair. Questions. A council member asked about liability. She pointed to the line on the sheet. Another asked about data. She said, "We log, not brand," and held up an anonymized incident form with boxes that looked somehow comforting. She stepped back, because stepping back is part of the job. "City parks," the chair said. Barlow walked to the mic, set a clear sleeve on the lectern, and slid out a stack. Date stamped in blue, waivers, sign-in sheets, observer code of conduct, incident report from the lip laceration, with parent decision to self-transport documented and scanned privacy TARP purchase order. He tapped the corner of each page once, soft as a cough. We tightened. We did not vanish. He glanced over his shoulder at the room. Cookies Wednesday, he added. A ripple of not quite laughter moved through the rows and then sat down. The chair hid a smile and called the first speaker. The woman with the silver cross came forward, hands folded, quotes written on the back of a grocery list. My nephew was pushed past. No. Once, she said, steady. He paid. This doesn't smell like that. They stopped. In public, with witnesses. She turned, found Eli with her eyes, held, and then returned to the mic. I still worry, but I can worry with them. That counts. A man stepped up and used his 3 minutes to argue that miracles should be left to God and courtrooms. Another used his minutes to ask who would pay for more tarps. A reporter in the back row wrote the word tarps and underlined it twice, as if the plural mattered more than the fabric. Avery spoke field notes into the record. Wide frame shows rules, she said. Consent on video. We can choose to narrate less and show more. She placed a USB drive on the clerk's table like a tiny, unboastful grenade. Long cut, time-stamped. The chair called the Hale name, and Martin moved to the lectern. A man who had practiced sentences and then thrown them away. You don't know me, he said, and the room laughed once because they did. He held his hands on the wood like it steadied him. I show up because the hard days got smaller since the blue pens. He gestured toward Barlow's binder without looking. That's not politics. That's receipts, kid, someone said, soft from the second row. And Eli realized the clerk meant the next on the list and not him. A teenager in a school hoodie came up and said the park made their little brother try in public without shame. He used the word boring 3 times, like he was choosing it on purpose. Between speakers, the brass door closer at the side coughed. Each time, the hinge inside announced its opinion in a small, high squeal, not loud, persistent. Heads turned. People winced. A body man in a polo tried to ignore it into good behavior. It squealed again. Royce asked to be recognized and he wore contrition like a fitted coat. We all want what's best, he said, palms angled to the room. My office is eager to partner. He breathed to continue, but the chair lifted a hand. Before you continue, she said, looking at a tablet, we've received multiple emails you sent regarding staging a statement and asking hospital comms to lead with inspiration over policy. They're in the record. The court reporter's fingers did not hesitate. The aide went still, eyes at the tote, like maybe the right paper in the right order could make time walk backward. I misspoke in private, he said. You wrote, the chair said, we prefer boring in public. She nodded toward the squeaking closer. And maintenance. From the aisle, Eli rose without asking. A 9-year-old, with a body like a small question mark, that had learned to uncurl. He walked to the side door, found the hinge, and took the little bottle Martin had slipped him into the hoodie pocket for luck. He put a pinhead drop where the metal kissed itself, worked the door open and shut twice. The squeal died. The closer breathed in a lower key that made backs relax. He went back to his seat. The room laughed not at him, with relief, and then settled the way animals do when the noise stops telling them to leave. The chair watched him go. Thank you, she said, not smiling. Dana returned to the mic once more with something thin and rectangular. Pilot guidelines, she said, sliding copies to the clerk. The chair, the city attorney, PDF, 10 pages. The blue of the pens, type big enough for tired eyes. Breath heat. Consent. Time. No hero photographs. A box labeled, Stop on Good. that took up more real estate than any logo. "Will adjust with use," she said. "That's the hinge. It should move." Public comment closed not with a gavel but with the chair's palm. "Open. Here's what we will do," she said. "City Parks will continue the program with posted rules and incident reporting. The hospital will host observer slots. We will not permit branding on site." She let branding sit in the air long enough for everyone to smell it. "We will accept donations of tarps and blue pens. We will not accept the word miracle into policy." Royce spoke out of turn and was gavelled with a single rap that echoed like a warning shot. He sat. The aide texted furiously into a device that refused to grow sympathy. Cameras from stations that preferred adjectives decided to film the hinge instead and got pretty footage of a small machine that had learned to behave. Meeting adjourned. People lingered as if standing up would erase the record. The court reporter packed her machine with the ceremony of a surgeon. The interpreter relaxed her hands and signed, "Finish," to no one in particular. In the hall, the concerned woman with the cross came up to Eli and Martin. "I said what I said," she told Eli, and her voice wore edges still. "But if you need someone to tell you, no, out loud before you forget." She tapped her own chest. "I'm good at." "No, we're building a list," Francine said, appearing with a clipboard. She had added, "No sayers invited." To the bottom, the woman wrote her name large. Blue. Proud. Avery leaned against the wall, the camera strap cutting a line across her shoulder. Phone in her hand showing a screen full of tiny green bars. Climbing. "Long cut is up," she said. "4 views so far. One's mine." "Good number," Barlow said, satisfied in a way politicians never are. He flipped the binder closed and checked the tab. Filed. Royce came down the steps slower than he had climbed them. Reporters asked for quotes. He offered sentences without verbs. Someone asked about the DMs. He said the phrase, "context," and the marble gave it back colder. He stepped into the gray outside and found the side door moved now without squeal. He touched the hinge as if it might share its secret and got oil on his fingertip. He wiped it on his coat. It left a dark comma. The group drifted down the steps into the kind of daylight that makes sidewalks honest. In the courtyard, a kid in a stroller blew, spit bubbles and clapped at pigeons. The pigeons declined to be moved by public comment. Back at the house, after food and the soft arguments of bedtime, Martin took the enveloped copies from the drawer and slid one into a fireproof box. With passports and insurance things that make pain less expensive, he set the other packet by the mantel. Beneath the bagged, torn drawing, Eli stood a long moment, looking at the page that would not heal, then opened the composition book to the hinge he'd sketched and wrote, "Oil here, next to, breathe here." With the calm a person earns, Nora wheeled in quietly. No cameras, no ruleboard, no tarps. She braced her hands on the chair arms and then let them hover. "1," she said, to the room, to herself. 2, air felt less crowded. 3, she stood. Not tall, not long, enough. The radiator breathed. The house didn't clap because houses know better. Martin watched from the doorway and did not move his hands until she wobbled, and then stopped wobbling without him. Eli listened to the quiet, the way people listen for trains far off, and measured time in heartbeats and the steady tick of a clock that had decided to be a friend. Outside, night worked its way through the trees on the block, loosening the small sounds, tires hissing like applause, a dog tag against a collar, wind trying the park for fun. The swing set tested its chain and spoke into the dark, private and public at the same time, a syllable so modest it could pass for nothing, a hinge sound that meant the door was still doing its job. Chick. When the noise dies down and the cameras blink off, what stays is simple. Dignity grows where people choose patience, consent, and community over spectacle. This story isn't about miracles. It's about everyday courage naming what's unfair, breaking the kind of silence that keeps good folks small, and walking or inching toward the life you deserve. Real change often looks like blue ink and boring rules, like saying stop without apology, like neighbors showing up with receipts instead of rumors. As the old saying goes, true gold doesn't fear the fire. Heat only proves what's already there. For many of us, especially in our later seasons, it can feel easier to stay quiet, to carry other people's judgments, or the weight of old shame. But the long road shows the good horse. We learn who we are by staying steady, setting boundaries, and refusing to let toxic patterns write our names for us. Justice isn't a headline, it's a habit of listening, of protecting the vulnerable, of welcoming difference without needing a spotlight. If you're wrestling with prejudice your own or someone else's, start small. Ask before you assume. Pause before you post. And remember that respect is a muscle that strengthens with use. I'd love to hear how this landed with you. Which moment rang true? Where have you seen patient, quiet bravery make a difference in your family, church, union hall, clinic, or town square? Share your story in the comments, or tell us the lesson you'd pass down. If this spoke to you, tap like to help others find it, and subscribe so you won't miss the next hard human story we sit with together. Wishing you a calm evening, a warm kitchen, and the steady kind of hope that hums beneath the day, the kind that carries you through the noise and into the light.